The NFL season in the books, guys. We are going to talk about the NFL MVP award, talk about which players are on track to win it. I've taken 10 of the top players in football based on their week one performance. No real random players on here. I left out O.J. Howard despite him having 2 touchdowns, for example. We're going to talk about these 10 players based on their week one performance, which of them is going to be winning the MVP, which ones may be having some record-breaking seasons as well, or at least are on track to, and which wide receiver could potentially win the MVP. If you guys like tier lists like this, consider subscribing or liking the video, and make sure you watch all the way through to see my opinions about all of these players. We're going to go ahead and start with Davante Adams. We're going in whatever order they threw it up here. First ever wide receiver MVP. Last year I definitely said that was the case for Davante Adams. He has regressed a little bit this year just based on his week one performance. He's on track for 17 receiving yards, 170 receptions, and 2,397 receiving yards. I guess he hasn't regressed, but we're going to get to a wide receiver or two with some even better stats than that. So Davante Adams, if he were to keep that up, definitely first ever wide receiver MVP potentially. But yeah, we got some other wide receivers to talk about in a minute. Before we get there, though, we do have Josh Allen here. Josh Allen having a great week last week for Buffalo. He's on pace for 68 total touchdowns, with a healthy amount of rushing touchdowns in there. 34 interceptions, kind of a bit, but 5,049 passing yards and almost 1,000 rushing yards, so about 6,000 yards from scrimmage, along with those 68 touchdowns. Really, really would put him in the MVP conversation, I'd say. There is one guy I think a little bit better, but I think that Josh Allen really is going to be in that conversation one way or another. Another guy in that conversation will be Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, 17 rushing touchdowns, 2,788 rushing yards he's on track for, 306 rushing attempts. That is a lot. He should be the bell cow of bell cows in New York this year. He's also on pace for 102 receptions, 510 receiving yards, and 17 two-point conversions. Yeah, just adding more value there. Those two-point conversions, if he can get one of those every single week, he's just adding more value and more stock to his, his attempt to be the MVP this season. Running backs do win it, but not as much as quarterbacks do. I think Saquon Barkley, if any running back can do it this year, it is him. Jamar Chase, very similar stats week one to Davante Adams. They both had the same amount of touchdowns and receptions. So both of these guys, for the wide receivers, are on pace for 17 receiving touchdowns, 170 receptions, and Jamar Chase on pace for a little bit less receiving yards with 2,193. Still an outstanding number, though. If he were to keep that up, could potentially be the first ever wide receiver MVP. Though, of course, Joe Burrow would have something to say about that, being the one throwing to him. Interesting that none of the quarterbacks for the wide receivers on this list are also on here. So definitely eating up a lot of targets in their positions, for sure. All right, Justin Herbert, I think, is an MVP dark horse. He is a stellar game manager, actually having less than 300 yards in week one, but still carrying his team to a victory. They're looking for their first 2-0 start since 2012 on Thursday Night Football. And at this point, he is on pace, Justin Herbert, that is on pace for 51 passing touchdowns with no interceptions, but less than 5,000 passing yards, 4,743. So I do think he's an MVP dark horse. I think he is quietly a very, very stellar quarterback, and I think more and more people are starting to notice that as time goes on, as the years pass in his young career. Justin Jefferson and Cooper Kupp. Going to go ahead and put both of them into first ever wide receiver MVP. They're just on a different level than Davante Adams and Jamar Chase, at least so far this season. Obviously very early into the season, but Justin Jefferson on pace for 34 receiving touchdowns, 153 receptions, and 3,128 receiving yards. Absolutely astronomical. Cooper Kupp on pace for about half that many receiving touchdowns, only 17, but way more receptions, 221 receptions compared to Jefferson's 153, but a lot less yards, 2,176 for Cooper Kupp. So Justin Jefferson just really, really on pace for the yardage, whereas Cooper Kupp on pace for the volume. We know in LA they just kind of dump it off to Cooper Kupp all the time. I mean, he might break the the receptions record either way. Both of these guys stellar. If anybody's going to win the first ever wide receiver MVP, it could be one of these guys. But they'll have to go through this man. They'll have to go through Patrick Mahomes. He's my pick for the MVP. Based on his stats week 1, he's on pace for 85 passing touchdowns with no interceptions and over 6,000 passing yards. That's 6,120 passing yards. If he were to put up those numbers, yeah, he's the guy. There's not much argument to be made. Josh Allen and Saquon Barkley, we talked about them there. Definitely contenders, but Patrick Mahomes is definitely the favorite. We have 2 more guys here, though. We have Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor on pace for a fantastic sophomore season as a running back. He's the second best running back in football, at least in week 1. He's on pace for 17 rushing touchdowns, almost 3,000 rushing yards, 527 rushing attempts. If they were to actually give him that, there's no way he lives. But if he were to, he'd also be grabbing 68 receptions and 238 receiving yards. So I mentioned Saquon Barkley should be the bell cow of bell cows. Jonathan Taylor may blow that out the window if he continues his streak of getting 31 rushing attempts per game. A very, very outrageous number. Another outrageous, I guess not number, but outrageous performance in week 1 was Carson Wentz in his debut for the Washington Commanders. If there's one guy that's on this list that seems like he doesn't belong, it is Carson Wentz. A lot of people had him written off as a lower tier quarterback this year, and in week 1 he showed that he may not be that. He's on pace for 68 passing touchdowns, 34 interceptions, which is a lot, but over 5,000 passing yards. That's more than Justin Herbert. That's more than Josh Allen. That's second only to Patrick Mahomes here. So 5,321 passing yards and also 204 rushing yards. Not a low number at all. Would look really good for Carson Wentz in his first year with the Washington Commanders. And that's it, guys. These are the players who may, and if week 1 is anything to go by, should win the NFL MVP. If you made it this far, you can tell. Obviously, there was definitely some satire, some joking around here. Will these guys actually get these stats? Will there actually be 34 interceptions thrown and 85 touchdowns thrown by Patrick Mahomes? Probably not, no. In fact, that seems impossible. But if he were to throw 5 every single game this season, then that is what the number would be. So I just multiplied their stats from week 1 by 17. It was really interesting to see how most of these guys, obviously the numbers were inflated. They sounded like Madden stats. But most of these guys, it's conceivable that they do compete for the top wide receiver, top running back, and top quarterback, and then further for the MVP award. Like I said, Carson Wentz is the only guy that kind of sticks out, but based on his week 1 performance, had to include him in here. So with all that said, guys, which of these guys do you think will be winning the MVP? Will it be somebody not on this list, like a Tom Brady, an Aaron Rodgers, or a defensive player? I didn't include any defensive players on here. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments section. If you like this video, a like is always appreciated. With all that said, guys, I appreciate you watching. This has been the guy who makes random tier lists. I rank everything. Have a great day.